Welcome back to 3C Media. My name is Craig Crash Collins, and it's time to reflect on 2023. This year was full of so many incredible moments from the local and national sports scene, and as always, B. Scott and I were honored to break it all down for you. So before we say hello to 2024, let's revisit some of the topics you, the audience, enjoyed the most from the past 365 days. This is the best of 3C Media 2023, and we start things off with our discussion on what it would take for Patrick Mahomes to unseat TB12 as the GOAT. How close to 7 rings does Mahomes need to get to unseat Brady as the GOAT? We always see the argument made in basketball. Speaking of Michael Jordan, people talk about like who's the best. When we've had this debate on our show even before, who's better, Jordan or LeBron? So I was like, let's have that same argument with Mahomes and Brady. So MJ has 6 titles, LeBron has 4, Brady currently has 7, Mahomes currently has 1. And so, kind of projecting that out, how many would he have to win to kind of get into that GOAT stratosphere? I think it's at least 4 for Mahomes. It's at least 4, maybe 5. I'm not entirely sure. Mahomes is finishing his age 27 season. Let's say he has another 13 to 15 seasons left. So winning 3 more times is very doable as far as like the years are there. It's not like, he's just now coming into his own at like age 33 and the window is shrinking. At the short end of that, he's on pace for 62,288 yards, which would put him 8th all time, and 499 touchdowns, which would put him at 5th all time. Brady is first in both categories. Brady has 3 MVPs. Mahomes already has 1. These points are to say that Mahomes is on pace to have a career that, even without the Super Bowls, is right there with TB12. So he'd have the MVPs, he'd have the touchdowns, he'd have the yardage. So the last thing kind of in that argument would be, how many Super Bowls has he won? Only 3 quarterbacks have won 4 Super Bowls. Obviously, Tom Brady, Montana, and Bradshaw both have 4. All 4 are also over 500 in the big game as well. Brady is 7-3. Bradshaw and Montana is 4-0. Are 4-0. Look, the number is probably 5 here. Like I said, it's probably 5 because then you'd have those are the only 2 quarterbacks to win that amount of Super Bowls. So just he and Brady are the only 2 at that many. But I think 4 Super Bowl wins in 6 to 7 appearances. Because again, he has to be above 500. He can't, because that's the whole knock against LeBron is that, like, yeah, he's won 4, but he's also been to like 9 and has lost. So he's lost over half of them. But yeah. 4 Super Bowl wins in 6 to 7 appearances, 3+ MVPs, finishing top 10 in passing yards, top 5 in passing touchdowns. I think that would give Mahomes a damn good case to be considered the GOAT. But I mean, even the fact that we're saying a case to unseat Brady might give you the answer already to that question. But no less than that, though. That's where I think Mahomes would have to be if we're going to go ahead, and that's where he has to be, as opposed to one championship making a good play in an AFC championship game like Tony Romo wanted to do.
So I think when we look at, so originally you had the question here as how many rings does Mahomes have to get to unseat Brady as the GOAT? To unseat Brady as the GOAT, he needs to get at least 7 with winning multiples in a row. It can't be like every 2 years he wins one.
Well, that's what Brady did, though. Brady, like every other year there for a while, was in the Super Bowl.
But then he also reeled off like 3 in a row here. He reeled off like 3 in 4 years.
By this time, yeah, by the time Mahomes is his age now, I think Brady already had 3. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't keep track of people's birthdays. Sorry, I struggle enough to keep track of my own family's birthdays. So trying to keep track of other people's that I don't even know personally, trying to keep track of their birthdays. Yeah. But look, he's got to win, I think, 7 to be able to unseat. Now, to be in the conversation, he needs to win a couple more MVPs. He needs to put together some really high statistical numbers. He needs to win at least 3, I'll say, Super Bowls. Because look, when we look at the conversation of the GOAT, the greatest of all time, the greatest quarterback to ever play, the two that always come up are Brady and Peyton, Tom and Peyton. We don't really talk about Terry Bradshaw or Joe Montana, even though they won. They were both 4-0 in the Super Bowl, whereas Peyton was 2-2. But Peyton put up these unearthly numbers throughout his career, and probably would still hold quite a few of the records had Tom Brady not played till he was 45. And again, I don't know if he's 45 because I don't keep track of people's birthdays. Yeah. 45, okay. Yeah. Same thing, and then you have to at least win more than one, because then you look at players like Drew Brees, who held all of those records for a while and only won one Super Bowl. But Drew Brees is not in the conversation for the greatest of all time. Then you look at a player from the past like Dan Marino, who was a really, 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 really good quarterback, but never won a Super Bowl. And he's not in those conversations. So I think it comes down to just a conglomerate of things, not just winning the Super Bowls, but being able to put up consistent MVP and record-breaking numbers. I think it's going to be a little bit harder for Mahomes to do that, and he's going to have to rely more on not record-breaking numbers. It's going to be harder for him to get the record-breaking numbers because he relies so much on his feet as well. A lot of their offense is nothing there. He makes something out of nothing. And that can win you Super Bowls, and that can win you MVPs. But it's not going to get you the passing records or anything like that. So I think MVPs and Super Bowls are going to be Mahomes' way to get into that conversation. Everybody's kind of got some sort of niche that's in that conversation. Is that making any sense?
Yeah. So
because there's so many players that have won a lot of Super Bowls that we just don't put into the conversation. Like Joe Montana is not consistently in the conversation for greatest of all time, and we're always looking at Tom Brady and Peyton Manning.
Right. So because Tom Brady is in another stratosphere, which again I think answers the question right there as far as like who's the GOAT, it's whatever, but he's in such a different stratosphere that it has been a long time since we've heard. I mean, I think Bradshaw isn't talked about as much just because a lot of that is the steel curtain and not so much. Right. I mean, heck, I've back when I had a little bit more time on my hands, I watched all the America's games, like the documentary that they used to do and I think they still do for the Super Bowl champions. And I think Terry Bradshaw at one point was like either benched or he didn't go into the season as like QB1, even like after some of the Super Bowl wins. It's because like he wasn't as much of a focal point of that offense. Like he was, like, I'm not sitting here saying Terry Bradshaw wasn't a good quarterback. I mean, he was. But it was the fact that I think he's kind of overshadowed a bit by how good that defense was, and that kind of thing. But when Brady was first kind of having that first dynasty, he did get compared to Joe Montana, and that was kind of the comparison that a lot of people made. And I think that's why, you say 3, and I just think, or in that, in that ballpark. And that's why, like, yes, he can win the MVPs. Yes, he can do all the stuff with the numbers, but I think he can, I think that's why the Super Bowls are so critical, because the Super Bowl, he can win the Super Bowls without having the MVPs and all that stuff to be considered, but he can't like have all those numbers and then not have the Super Bowls, which I think is what you're trying to say. Like you have to have both, but you definitely need the Super Bowls to be able to do that.
But Peyton's only got 2.
I don't know that. I don't know.
I think Peyton is looked at as one of the greatest of all time because of the mind that he had. The way that he could read a game and read a defense and just maneuver his team on the fly put him in that conversation.
Yeah.
And he had an uncanny ability that not many people had. Like the way, it was just, I mean, yes, he could throw the ball amazing. He was a really great quarterback, but the way he could just be like 3 steps ahead of his opponent, it felt like. was, I think, what really put him in that conversation.
Right. And I think that also, why it's kind of changed a little bit too is that it's the same argument we hear with MJ and LeBron is like one of the big things that gets talked about there is like, oh, well, they played in different eras. That's kind of the same why we don't talk about Montana and Bradshaw as much now because like, oh, well, the game is completely different from when it was back then than it is now. But yeah, I think definitely.
I don't know how much different it is from Montana because Montana was in a very pass happy offense.
Right, but still, like the way, like
I guess compared to
go,
what like nowadays there are like passing is the name of the game and you run to set up the pass. Where
and
back
the
then
rules
you ran
are so much more geared to passing and that kind of thing, like with the defensive holding and pass interference.
So they were a little bit more of ahead of their time,
right?
With Montana.
So, but yeah, I think definitely. So I think the number we land on is like 4-ish. Is where
to be in the conversation,
right?
To unseat Brady, you have to at least win 7 and one more MVP than he ever did.
Yeah.
But to be in the conversation, I think you need to win 3 more, including the one you've already got.
Oh, so you do need to have 4. That's what you're saying. You need to win 3 more is what you're saying. Okay. I thought you meant just 3 alone. I was like, I don't know if he needs to win only 1.
I think I worded that wrong.
Yeah.
But you need 3 more.
I got you. Moving ahead, we graded another solid Chris Ballard draft class. We had over 250 some selections, and 12 of those were the Colts. They were able to just go, do what they've always done, kind of in draft day is, turn, however many picks into, just basically, not really doubling the
army.
Picks, but yeah, getting a nice little contingent coming in to Lucas Oil Stadium in 2023. Looking at the selections for the Colts, round 1, pick 4, they go out and get Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida. Great selection there. Last season in Gainesville, he completed 54% of his passes for 2,549 yards, 17 touchdowns, 9 picks. He also ran for 654 yards and 9 touchdowns. Round 2, pick 45, Kansas State cornerback Julius Brents goes to the Horseshoe. He was a 2022 first-team member of the Big 12, all Big 12 team. 4 interceptions. That was tied for 3rd in the Big 12. Round 3, pick 79. The Colts go out and get North Carolina wide receiver Josh Downs, who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons the last couple of years. He had 1,335 yards, 8 touchdowns in 2021. Follows that up with 1,029 yards, 11 touchdowns in 2022. He was a 2-time recipient of first-team All-ACC honors and had the second most receptions in FBS the past 2 seasons with 195. His player comp is Tyler Lockett, which, heck, if you play fantasy football, you know how electric Tyler Lockett can be to have on your team. Round 4, the Colts were able to get 2 picks in that round, fairly close to each other. At 106, they get BYU offensive tackle Blake Freeland. At 110, they get Northwestern defensive end Adetomiwa Adibare. Made sure and went to NFL.com to make sure I had the pronunciation right there. He was an honorable mention, all Big Ten member in 2022. He led the Wildcats in sacks with 5, 38 tackles, 9 for loss, and 2 forced fumbles in the 2022 campaign. Then 4 picks for the Colts in round 5. At 138, they get South Carolina cornerback Darius Rush. He had 15 pass breakups, 3 picks throughout his career. He had a career-high 38 tackles in 2022. His player comp is Richard Sherman, according to CBS, so that's some high praise there. If the Colts can get...
Hey, and that's a Gus Bradley guy for you.
For sure. Round 5, pick 158, the Colts get Cal safety Daniel Scott. No relation to B. Scott there. Top 5 in the Pac-12 in INTs last year with 3. He had 2 forced fumbles, which also had him in the top 5 in that category last year. Round 5, pick 162, the Colts get Miami tight end Will Mallory, who was a member of the 2022 second-team All-ACC squad, 538 yards and 3 touchdowns last season. He's one of the 10 among the FBS tight ends for the last 2 seasons. He's top 10 there, as far as receiving yards. Round 5, pick 176. You have Northwestern running back Evan Hall. He had 1,009 yards and 7 touchdowns in 2021, 913 yards and 5 touchdowns last season. 546 yards and 2 touchdowns came in the passing game for Evan Hall last season. And his player comp is Rex Burkhead, which was a good, kind of out of the backfield, target with the Patriots. Round 6, pick 211. The Colts get Wagner linebacker Titus Leo. Round 7, pick 221. The Colts nab Texas A&M cornerback Jalen Jones, who allowed no touchdowns. And quarterbacks had a 38.5% completion percentage with throwing his way in 2022. So a real lockdown player. I mean, that's numbers in the ACC right there. Which is pretty incredible. And then rounding out the Colts draft, round 7, pick 236 is Northern Michigan offensive tackle Jake Witt. So there you go, 12 players on their way to the Circle City. And when we look at a grade for this draft, I was trying to think of where I wanted to go with it. Last season, I gave Ballard a solid B. This year, I'm going B+. I know I've seen some places that give him, an A minus. I'll get to why it's not that here in a second. But I mean, you look at the average grade of the top 6 players for the Colts this year. Through which goes through the start of round 5. ESPN graded them out on an average of a B. It's like right at 80%. And I mean, they went right down the line as far as getting the team's biggest needs. I mean, I talked about last, in our draft preview show for the Colts that, they needed a quarterback, a cornerback, a wide receiver, an offensive lineman, and they went in that order too. They were like, okay, what's the checklist? All right, we got our quarterback. Hey, we got our wide receiver. Or, hey, we got a cornerback. Hey, we got our offensive lineman. There are some things I thought like I could nitpick that I thought, hey, I'd rather see this player in a Colts uniform. Like, for instance, Joey Porter Jr. or Keely Ringo at the cornerback position. I talked about Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee as a sleeper there. But to those points, I mean, Julius Brents is the tallest of the cornerback prospects in the top 10, and which is a huge attribute to have, being one of the tallest guys in that category, and he's still a great prospect. So, not like the Colts didn't get a great player in Julius Brents, and then Josh Downs was actually ranked higher than Hyatt by CBS. So, I try to find some things to be critical because I was like, am I being too soft? Because I feel like I've given, Ballard a B like the last few years. And so I was like, am I being too soft? And so that's what I was kind of looking at there even when I try to nitpick, the draft, I've ended up being like, okay, actually, no, that was a good pick. Oh yeah, no, I actually like that pick now that I think about it a little bit more. All in all, this was a typical Ballard draft where he ended up, with a boatload of draft capital, and brought in a lot of strong talent and depth and hit on all the team needs exactly. I went through our old outlines and looked at the other draft grades I've given out. I was afraid I was being too critical, like I said. First year we did grades was 2020, and that was the Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman draft. I gave that one an A, so I was like, okay, based on that curve, I don't know if I quite want to go with an A for this one. It's definitely close to that mark. It's probably the closest we've been to that mark. I gave 2021 a C, 2022 a B, so I feel better about a B plus here. So it's right there on that threshold of being an A minus B plus, but needless to say, I was pessimistic about this draft, and I definitely am not coming out on the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, this draft, like I was telling you off air, I thought Chris Ballard, outside of the Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman draft, I mean, because that obviously yielded 2 really good talents. I felt he knocked this one out of the park. I mean, he hit on every team need. He brought in, got good value. I feel like with some of these picks where he ended up getting them, like Julius Brents. I didn't think he would be available. Like for them to trade back twice and for him to still be available. I know everybody thought the Colts loved Keely Ringo. He would have been a good pickup as well. Julius Brents has the size though, and I think one of the deciding factors also he is an Indianapolis native. He's a graduate of Warren Central High School, so that always helps as well. But and that obviously probably wasn't the deciding factor. There was other reasons. But this just draft, I'm going to give it a solid A because when I start going through it, I look at, like, obviously Anthony Richardson um, I thought was a great pick. I mean, he's going to take a little bit of time to develop, but the Colts having Gardner Minshew does afford that ability, and also because the Colts aren't in a win now mode. But Anthony Richardson paired with Shane Steichen, this is going to be has the potential to be a really really good pickup. I mean, Anthony Richardson's comp by a lot of people on ESPN on draft day, they were comparing him to Cam Newton with a little bit of a higher upside. So that's actually really exciting to see. And then being able to get Josh Downs in the third round, I mean, I thought he would be going about where the Colts were picking originally in the second round. So being able to pick him up there is great. Blake Freeland is a guy that I was really hoping the Colts would land. He's a super athletic tackle. He's really good in the run block, which is, hey, that's great with Jonathan Taylor. He does have to get a little bit better with his pass blocking, but that's fine. Honestly, Blake Freeland, if he could add about 20 more pounds to his frame, he could potentially be a starting tackle on this offensive line. I don't know too much about the Tamiwa Adebawore pick, because when you watch Northwestern, they weren't very good this year. So nothing really stood out there. I mean, I'll be honest, I wasn't consistently watching Northwestern because of that. Darius Rush, he's such an interesting prospect to me because he came into college. He started off as a wide receiver and just recently made the switch to cornerback. He's got amazing speed. Was graded out as one of the fastest corners at the combine this year. So that's really great. Daniel Scott is interesting to me as well. He's going to be a key special teams player, but he's also one of those guys that he can step back in the safety role or he can come up and play in the slot at corner as well. And honestly, I kind of hope he makes a good name for himself because I would love to buy a Daniel Scott jersey, just to have a jersey that says Scott and actually be a player on the team. Will Mallory, that was an interesting pick. You kind of laughed at me when I said the Colts should pick a tight end. You said that's a full room. You're right, it is. Will Mallory, though, graded out as one of the faster tight ends in the draft. Also, fun fact, he is the grandson of the late Indiana football coach, Bill Mallory. So a little bit of a tie there. Evan Hall, I love this pick. He kind of fits into the scheme a little bit of where Nyheim Hines has been in the past. He is a good running back, but he's more well known for his pass catching abilities out of the backfield. So I can't wait to see what they do with him. Wagner linebacker Titus Leo. I feel like this could be one of those picks that, Chris Ballard always finds a diamond in the rough. And that kind of is what this pick is. And then Texas A&M quarterback Jalen Jones. I mean, for somebody that, was pretty much a shutdown corner in the SEC to fall to the 7th round, that's really interesting to me. And then Jake Witt, another athletic offensive lineman coming from Northern Michigan. There's not much tape or numbers on him because he's coming from Northern Michigan. They just didn't have much info, but I love that pick as well. Good value in the 7th round. Look, the Colts, what the big theme of the draft for them this year was athletic ability. This team, the Colts put together one of the most athletic hauls in the 2023 NFL draft. If you look at the relative athletic scores for the players that the Colts picked up, I mean, Anthony Richardson with a perfect score of 10, Julius Brents with a 9.99, Josh Downs with an 8.99, Blake Freeland with a 9.83, Adetamwa Abada, 9.72, Darius Russ 9.8, Daniel Scott 9.94, Will Mallory 9.05, Evan Hall 9.32, Titus Leo 8.48, Jalen Jones 8.79, and there wasn't a relative score for Tyler Witt because they're just Jake Witt just because there was not any, he was not at the combine and there wasn't really any information available for him. But I mean, this just shows that Ballard was looking to bring in an influx of elite athletes in this draft, and he accomplished that hands down. Um, and like as I said, you can see in the relative athletic score, the Colts I feel like knocked this one out of the park and were one of the better drafting teams this year.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about all that athleticism, and that's what like really makes me excited to watch these guys get on the field because especially on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, it really feels like the Colts are starting to get a strong like core for the future. It kind of it finally kind of after last season really didn't really know what direction the Colts were going in. Now you finally kind of see a direction, and I'm excited to watch a lot of these guys get on the field. I mean, first and foremost, Anthony Richardson. I think he might be the most excited. I'm probably the most excited to see him get on the field. I know that's kind of the
Yeah.
obvious, the obvious one getting off the jump here, but touched on it last week. You touched on it as well. His player comp was Cam Newton on CBS. His comp on ESPN is Josh Allen. And most importantly, it was noted in his post-draft analysis that by ESPN that he has similar traits to Jalen Hurts, who Shane Steichen turned into a Super Bowl caliber quarterback this past season. You touched on Gardner Minshew as well. I'm really, I say I'm excited to watch Anthony Richardson. I'm actually hoping that I'll be seeing Gardner Minshew for the first few weeks as Anthony Richardson develops, and I think it also
Hey,
matters
Jim
that.
Irsay Jim Irsay has come out and said that it is or Irsay and Ballard have come out and said it is ultimately up to Coach Steichen of when the reins will be handed over to Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and what I think it makes it all that more better is the fact that Minshew played for the Eagles last season. He was in Shane Steichen's system, and that may even help kind of accelerate the learning curve that Anthony Richardson is going to have and the developmental curve because hey, if he's got any issues, he's got a guy right in that room aside from Steichen who can be like, hey, this is how things are done. So that's really something that could be cool. I could see the plan being starting Minshew Mania until the bye week. Usually the Colts have a later bye week, so I can see hey, it's week 10. The Colts are going into their bye week. They're whatever, or maybe even whatever week they play on Thursday. That could also be an option as well. They're gearing up for a Thursday night game. They play their Thursday night game against the Broncos, a rematch of the greatest
Oh
Thursday
God.
night game of all
Oh God.
time. And
You're bringing up. I saw a TikTok recently, just this a couple days ago, of somebody saying, "Ah, great! Here's a potential Thursday night matchup we can see in the future: Will Levis versus Anthony Richardson. 4 touchdowns thrown to 6 interceptions combined between the two quarterbacks. Because the biggest knock on both of those quarterbacks, obviously, was accuracy.
right.
So, yeah, that's a potential Thursday night matchup because that's one we've seen before, the Titans and the Colts several times.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it could be either like basically the second buy that you get with that, or you could see after their actual buy. So that's a really cool thing. Richardson's an elite athlete. He's gonna go into the season with a lot of talent at his disposal. I mean, looking at just kind of down the roster, I mean, hopefully you're gonna get a full season of a healthy JT. You've got Zach Moss, who at the end of the season showed flashes. You bring in Hall. Josh Downs joins a wide receiver core of Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Isaiah McKenzie. You did mention the full tight end room. It's headlined by Kylan Grants and Jelani Woods. Unfortunately, I can kind of see Mo Alley Cox kind of being on that edge of
Yeah,
being
but
pushed. I mean,
he is your best inline blocker in that room
right. So
and
I
a
don't.
veteran presence. I mean, so that's what's really tough is like if you're gonna go for a running game like an RPO type uh,
Yeah, that's true.
strategy. I mean, Mo Alley Cox right there is one of your better blockers at tight end, whereas that's where Will Mallory was one of the weakest. He's not a very good blocker, but so I don't know that it's going to be interesting because that room is very crowded.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like this is the right system for Anthony Richardson. And there's a great young core around him for him to thrive in. So really excited to see him. And that's there's a lot of exciting things about what they did on defense as well. I mean, Adetamewa Adebare, he's got great strength and speed. Ran the fastest. We've talked about athleticism a lot tonight already. He ran the fastest 40-yard dash of any player over 280 pounds since 2006 at the
See,
compound earlier this year.
athletes,
Exactly.
athletes.
And not only that, not only is he quick, but he's got versatility. He can play on the edge. He can move inside a defensive tackle. You love that versatility, and which is great because you have an already great D line that the Colts are already. You have a lot of great players on that defensive line for the Colts, and so that now that you bring in another guy who can kind of move around and be plugged in where he's needed, that just makes him all that more better. So I mean, there's a lot of players to be excited about for the Colts this year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously on offense, you look at Anthony Richardson first and foremost. But for me, I'm really kind of looking at Josh Downs as my player I'm most excited for. Um, Everybody thought when Will McKenzie or Isaiah McKenzie was brought in that he was going to be the starter from the get go, the replacement of Paris Campbell. I'm not 100% sure of that anymore because of what Josh Downs brings to the table. I mean, he has great control of his body. He knows how to make contested catches, whether it's on the outside, the inside, across the middle. I mean, he's going to be a fun one to watch. I mean, when we look at his size and everything, I think his biggest comparable is T.Y. Hilton for this team because look, when T.Y. was drafted, I said it. I didn't think he was going to be much of anything more than a glorified punt returner. Josh Downs can do that as well. So, I mean, Josh Downs has the ability, I think, is going to give the Colts something that they haven't had since T.Y. Hilton was kind of more in his prime. Something that we all thought Paris Campbell could become, but just couldn't stay healthy. Um, yeah, so I'm really excited to see what kind of element Josh Downs brings to this Colts offense, especially with the way Shane Steichen's going to run it. I can't wait. Can I say Shane Steichen as the player I'm most excited
Yeah.
to see on offense, even though he's the head coach? I can't wait to see what he is able to do, the kind of offense he chooses to run with this team, just based off of what we saw from Philadelphia recently. On defense, the player that I'm most excited to watch there is South Carolina cornerback Darius Rush. Like I said, he used to play wide receiver, switched over to corner. One of the things about him is he he's not a clean route runner with wide receivers all the time, but he's got the speed to make up for that. He ran in the 4.3 range for the 40 at the combine. So he's fast. So he's got the speed. He knows how to high point a ball. His background as a wide receiver is going to pay dividends here for him because he's got that size, he's got the speed, and he can think like a wide receiver. So I'm really excited to watch him. I guess second for me would obviously be Julius Brents, just because of his size as well. I mean, look, Gus Bradley has he's going to making over this secondary here. He's bringing in the players that the attributes that he likes in his secondary players, and that's length. And this draft for the Colts was not lacking in length in the defensive secondary for sure.
So before we move on to the draft as a whole, one final kind of question here: on a scale of hot to cold, what's your level of optimism from this draft? For me, it's warm. As I noted before, I went in the draft very pessimistic. As we all know, I said, Ballard addressed all the Colts' needs. He didn't do anything crazy, and he came away with 12 picks. I said it before that. I said it last week that, or maybe it was during the Colts draft preview, that I said it basically my optimism level all hinges on the first pick, and a lot of the pessimism came from the discussion and the talks and the rumors that the Colts were going to take Will Levis. I did not want Will Levis. I thought, yes, you have your obvious 1 and 2 in Stroud and Young. You have your, and then after that you have Richardson Levis, and then after that there's another drop off. And I thought between those two, Richardson, I kind of came around on Richardson. I talked myself into it. Not, and I feel different from the time from last year when I talked myself into Matt Ryan. Last year, I didn't like the decision to go get Matt Ryan. I talked myself into it, and then my gut instinct was right all along. Not necessarily that he'd be that bad, but that he wasn't the solution the Colts necessarily needed. This year, I was so excited to potentially get Stroud, and then once that was off the board, I kind of got pessimistic. But then I looked at Richardson and Levis. I came around on Richardson. So when all the discussion was, oh hey, the Colts are going to take Levis, I was like, please do not take Will Levis. If you need any bigger red flag, he puts mayo in his coffee. That's all you need to know about him. And so,
well, no, actually, if you listen to what some of the guys were like, Mel Kiper and them were talking about, with one of the biggest reasons he fell was teams just get turned off by some of the stuff that they saw from him,
yeah,
such as the mirror selfies, his infatuation with the gun show with his arms. It's like, look, quarterbacks don't look like that anymore. Like even like the Peyton Mannings of the world, they weren't like ripping these huge biceps or anything. So the infatuation he had with himself was something that really turned teams off and was one of the key contributors to why he fell.
right.
Right? This like if you're 2-2 yourself, how are you going to be able to handle leading a team?
But yeah, to tie a bow on it, that my pessimism was that I didn't want the Colts to draft Will Levis. I knew the fourth pick was going to kind of set the tone for how the draft was going to go and how I was going to view the draft. And so when it got off hot with them getting Richardson, I felt pretty good from there on out. So yeah, no, I'm back into positive vibes, positive spirits when it comes to the Colts.
So for me, I'm warmer than warm, but not hot. I'm kind of somewhere in between. That perfect place where you get in the shower and it's like, yeah, this is a perfect temperature. Um, I say that because the Colts, they answered a lot of questions, filled in a lot of needs, but they are still in a position where we all kind of know, like, we can all see a general direction they're going in, which is great. That's what the Colts needed. They needed a vision. The Colts have a vision now. They know the direction they want to go in, and we're going to get there. It's just be prepared for another bumpy season. And I'm kind of happy about that, just based off of the prospects coming into next year's draft, which is absolutely loaded. Now the Colts, most likely, if even just because they be possibly picking in the top 5, top 10, doesn't mean they need a quarterback. Um, we can't be a Tennessee and draft a new quarterback in hopes that that's the replacement every year. But the Colts have the opportunity, to gain these young guys experience and still be able to build for the future to become a legitimate long-term Super Bowl contender. And that makes me very optimistic about the future. Am I optimistic as far as wins go for this next season? No, I'm not. But in the long run, that's actually a good thing. So, but hey, if I'm proven wrong and the Colts come out and look a ton better and make the playoffs, I'll be like, hey, that's fine, because that means the development of these players is ahead of schedule. Yeah, did we miss out on a player like Marvin Harrison Jr.? Yeah, we did. But hey, it's okay, because things are looking better now. So I think it's going to be a win-win regardless.
Oh yeah,
next season.
Like I said, I think it finally seems like the Colts have a direction where for a lot of last year in this offseason to start off with, it did not look like that was
And
going to
the
be the
Colts
case.
actually have a quarterback that's different. It's different for the Colts. I mean, Andrew Luck was probably the most athletic quarterback the Colts have had in recent memory. And I mean, by no means was he like a tuck it and run as much as he can type player. He did out of necessity, and look where that got him. But The Colts like recently have just been bringing in these statues almost. So it's going to be really interesting to watch a player like Anthony Richardson under center with the Colts. And I mean, oh my gosh, him and Jonathan Taylor, that tandem could has the potential to be one of the best QB running back tandems in the NFL because now with Anthony Richardson out there, defenses are going to have to pause for a second when he goes to hand off the ball because is he keeping it? Is he really handing it to Jonathan Taylor? They have to read the moment, and that's going to give either one of them enough time to put up some pretty big numbers. So I read somewhere somebody say, yeah, Jonathan Taylor's touches may decrease, but ultimately could see his yardage go up because of the threat of Anthony Richardson running.
I like that you brought up Andrew Luck because that's another thought that I had, I think either yesterday morning or this morning, where I was like, hopefully Richardson can come out and be, I mean, obviously he's not the prospect that Andrew Luck was, but hopefully he can come out and be good because I am so tired of Ryan Grigson getting credit for drafting Andrew Luck. So hopefully now, drafting Anthony Richardson, he can become a good enough player to where that kind of quiets that part of the Grigson is better than Ballard tandem there. So hopefully that could be the case. The show that was the most successful from this past year on all platforms was our IHSAA football preview. Here's a portion of that podcast. Moving on to 4A. Before we kick off, we're going to say what we do in a lot of our previews. You know your team, your area better than us, so if we missed something, feel free to drop that in the comments section down below. Give us your thoughts, anything you thought, hey, you guys missed this or you got this wrong, please let us know because there are a lot of schools to cover. Thank goodness for things like Indiana Football Digest, John Harrell, and Max Preps. That's pretty much where I lived this past weekend, getting all the lowdown on all the teams. So biggest storyline there for me is how real are East Central running backs Josh Ringer? How realistic is his Mr. Indiana football hopes? He's on the short list according to the Indy Star. Of the last 10 Mr. Football winners, 3 have been the running back position. We had Markel Jones from Columbus East in 2014, Charlie Spiegel from New Pal in 2019, Carson Steele from Center Grove in 2020. How Ringer stacks up against those guys: Jones had 3,500 rushing yards and 60 touchdowns. Spiegel had 3,100 rushing yards and 55 touchdowns. Then you have Ringer, who last year put up 2,368 rushing yards and 39 touchdowns. Then you had Steele having 1,659 yards and 31 touchdowns. Ringer was third in the state in rushing yards. He's the state leader as far as returnees go. He also led the state with 42 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns in the 4A state championship. So if he can put together another season where he flirts with 2,500 rushing yards and leads the state in that category as well as touchdowns en route to a title, I mean, I think he's got a really compelling chance. If he has anything close to what he did last year, I think he'll be in a good position.
Yeah, the 4A, I think it has quite a bit of talent. I think that's going to be the key. I think that's going to be the biggest storyline is the level of talent that's coming out of 4A. Can they contend with the 5A and 6A on names on bigger schools? I think that's my storyline is just how this talent can take over the class 4A. Whether it's, who you just talked about or Mylan Graham out of New Haven, there's just there's some good solid talent there. And I'm really interested to see how that is looked at on the grand stage as far when it comes to the Indiana Mr. Football. Yeah. Because we have seen that the Indiana Mr. Football voters are not afraid to go after to select somebody from a lower class. I mean, usually you might think, they were really good, but look at the level of competition they were playing against. They're not afraid to say, hey, this 1A linebacker who also plays wide receiver, he is the best player in the state, regardless of level. So it'll be interesting.
I mean, you've got Jack Kaiser from Pioneer. I think they were 1A. You've got Charlie Spiegel, which I talked about. He was from 5A New Pal. Last year, Drake Bowen was 2A Andrean. So, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. Which is nice to see. It's nice to see that they're not just like, well, it's got to be a 6A guy or a 5A guy. It can be those guys that are at, some of the lower levels who just are like, hey, you know what? Yeah, our opponents may not be as tough as 6A, but at the same time, our numbers reflect that. It's not like everyone's putting out the numbers we are or close to those numbers. Like we are showing you that, hey, we are playing the lesser opponent and taking advantage of that and putting up really, gaudy stats and things like that. So, as far as toughest sectional goes, I'm looking at sectional 24. It's always we talked about the Fort Wayne schools. It's just as crazy with the Evansville schools as well. Evansville Rights, they had an undefeated season a year ago in the regular season. They were either the preseason number 2 in 4A according to Indiana Football Digest. They returned running back defensive lineman Levi Oxley, who was on the All 3C media team last year. He's back and ready to contribute on both sides of the ball again. You've got Evansville Memorial, who's ranked number 6 by Indiana Football Digest. They made it to the regional last season before losing to East Central. You've also got a pesky Boonville team that was 8-4 last year too. So you've got a lot of teams in the southern part of Indiana as well that like to beat and bang on each other, and we'll see who can maybe emerge from that sectional and if they can be a team that's contending at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. Sectional 24 is a bloodbath, and that's always a fun one to keep an eye on. What I love about 4A the most is that this is where we see a lot of the really good schools up in northern Indiana and southern Indiana. This is the one where you can almost leave central Indiana out of the conversation. To me, that's a lot of fun. I really do like that. I mean, there are a couple of teams in 4A that in central Indiana that get their nose in there every once in a while, but anything coming from north and south is super entertaining. So yeah, but sectional 24, I mean, it's very similar to the Fort Wayne area. Those schools are going to beat up on each other, and anybody that comes out of there does have a legitimate shot to make that run to Lucas Oil Stadium. So definitely keeping an eye on that sectional as well.
Player to watch. I'm staying with East Central running back, the senior Josh Ringer. Going to Miami of Ohio, so staying in the MAC. But I kind of wish he was coming to Ball State, but it's fine. It's okay. He had nearly 2,400 yards, 39 touchdowns on the ground last season, 42 total. We mentioned that. 4 games of 4 or more rushing touchdowns, including the 4A state final. He had 5 touchdowns versus Martinsville, also in the 4A state tournament. 6 touchdowns versus South Dearborn in September. That earned him 3C Media Player of the Week honors. I know that put him on our radar. He's a front runner for Mr. Football in Indiana, and he's going to be pivotal to East Central's plan of going back to back. So Josh Ringer is my player to watch. I think he can have a really outstanding season.
In 4A, the conversation should begin and end with New Haven wide receiver Mylan Graham. Mylan Graham is a 5-star recruit committed to Ohio State, chose Ohio State over offers from Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State, Tennessee, Texas A&M.
They have good wide receivers,
suspects.
Right?
What?
Ohio State typically has good wide receivers, right?
Yeah. But, I mean, his tape is eye-popping. Last year, he caught 48 passes for over 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. Yes, New Haven was only 5-5 last year, and they lost in the first round of the sectionals to DeKalb. But, man, this kid has what it takes to really help take New Haven to the next level this season. If he can live up to his ranking and his with the 5 stars, there's no reason he can't help New Haven be more successful this year. And honestly, if he wants to be considered for Indiana Mr. Football, he's going to have to take that next step and really help take New Haven to some more success this year than just 5-5.
Right. So as far as the dark horse goes in our state champion, I'm going dark horse wise. I'm going to go with Kokomo. They finished in the top 10 in 5A according to Max Preps, 7th in the final AP poll, 6th in the coaches poll. The Wildcats earned their first sectional and regional title since 2017 last year. They lost to eventual state runner-up New Prairie in the semi-state. IFD has them at preseason number 4 in 4A, and although they'll have to break in a new signal caller in 2023, they do return all-state running back Darian Story, who ran for nearly 1,200 yards and 17 touchdowns on the offensive side, and they also get all-state defensive back Reese Beard back as well. He had 64 tackles, 8 for loss, 11 pass breakups, and 3 interceptions in 2022. So they've got a lot of talent on that Kokomo team, and I think they can go deep into that tournament as well. Of course, I mean, heck, they only lost by 1 point to New Prairie. I believe that was a 10-9 final. So, they were right there in the conversation, to get to Lucas Oil last year, and I think they have the firepower to do it again. However, I'm going to keep the trend going with my state championship picks. I'm going to go with East Central. It's so hard to ignore what the Trojans did last season and what they bring back this year. I know I've talked a lot about Josh Ringer and all of his successes and all he brings to the table. They also return quarterback Cole Burton. He had nearly 1,800 yards, 22 touchdowns a year ago. They also return All-State offensive lineman Noah Snyder, All-State linebacker Braden Rouse. Rouse last year, 83 tackles, 4.5 sacks, and a fumble recovery. The Trojans were a force last year, and with all they have coming back, I think it'll be more of the same. I think it's one of those things where like I picked, some of my other picks were just kind of based on past history or like on a whim. With this one, it's like, man, all the talent they have coming back is just so crazy, and so I'm going with the Trojans to repeat this year.
So for me, I don't know if you can really call this one a dark horse, but I'm going my dark horse pick is Evansville Wright. Yeah, I know they finished number 2 last year, preseason number 2 this year, but I don't know. I feel like that like I said earlier, that Evansville sectional is going to set them up pretty nicely. Especially when you're returning one of your key players that's on both sides of the ball with Levi Oxley. It's hard to overlook some of those things. So yeah, Evansville Wright is my dark horse, and I agree I'm going with you as well on this one. East Central, man, I mean, last year was really, they were just out of this world. Really on both sides of the ball. I mean, I'm interested to see if they can continue that success into this season and make that run again. But again, it's one of those things that with what they are returning, you have to say the state championship, the 4A state championship, is theirs until proven otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, they've just got so much coming back, and I mean, there are a lot of good teams at the top of 4A as well, but it's just so hard to ignore what East Central returns.
And finally, we wrap things up with a snippet from another well-received podcast, our IHSAA Boys Basketball State Finals preview.
One final game to get into tonight. It's the 4A state final, tipping off at 8:15. We all know it'll probably be more like 8:30, 8:45, depending on how long the first game of the evening goes. But that is the number 5 Kokomo Wildcats. They're 24-4 against number 1 Ben Davis, the Giants. They're 32-0, looking to go undefeated. I think they're looking to be the first team to go undefeated since Warren Central did it, like back in 2017 or 18. Warren Central went, I think, 33-0. So these two teams played back in December with Ben Davis winning 58-51. Looking at the Wildcats' road to Cambridge in the sectionals, they beat Harrison of West Lafayette 68-63 in overtime before defeating Marion in the sectional championship 85-51. In the regional, they defeated Fort Wayne North 68-55. In the semi-state, they won 73-51 over Fort Wayne before knocking off my 4A state championship pick, number 2 Penn 58-57. The Giants' road to Cambridge in the sectionals, they defeated Southport 62-46. They defeated Franklin Central 76-46 before defeating Pike in the championship 80-59. In the regionals, they defeated number 6 Indianapolis Cathedral, the defending 4A champs, 63-53, and then in the semi-state they won 78-55 over Bloomington North before beating number 8 Brownsburg to punch their ticket to Cambridge Fieldhouse. They defeated they defeated Brownsburg 66-38.
Wow,
so
that score kind of stands out to me.
Right,
Oof.
yeah, insane.
I mean, Brownsburg's got 5-star cannon catchings leading that team.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, they're the number 8 team in 4A. I mean, it's one thing to you played a 4A team, but that 4A team was like 14 and whatever, and you beat them by 30. Like that's one of the top teams in the state that you're beaten down by 30 points. So pretty impressive. As far as my player to watch, I'm going with Kokomo Jr. I think he's a junior. I wrote down senior, but he's a junior, I believe.
He's a junior.
Flory Badunga. He averages 20.
No, Flory Badunga.
Badunga?
Yeah, in the pronunciation guide here, it is B-I-H, Dune, like the word dune, Badunga.
Badunga. Okay. I mean this in the most respectful way possible. It reminds me of Bazinga. That's what I'm gonna have to remind me of it. It's got that same cadence. It has that same cadence as Bazinga. Badunga.
Hey, you do what you got. You do what you got to do.
Hey, I'm going with that. He averages 20 points per game. He's 10th in 4A in scoring, 31st in the state. He averaged 24 points per game this postseason. He had 28 points per game. He's got a 28 points per game average during semi-state. He had 31 points versus Fort Wayne and 25 points versus Penn. He had his 14 rebounds per game is the best in 4A. He had 19 rebounds versus Fort Wayne, 22 versus Penn. He also leads the class in blocks per game with 4.5. He had 16 points, 17 rebounds, 7 blocks versus Ben Davis back in December. So if Kokomo wants to bring down the Giants, they're going to need another big game, another big day from Badunga. They're going to need him to have another fantastic night like he's done all postseason. And when I looked for my key to the game, I figured the best place to find the answer to this question was to go back to their matchup in December. And honestly, Kokomo played Ben Davis pretty well in that game. They had a better field goal percentage. They shot better from the line. They had the same number of rebounds, also had more blocks. The couple of things that I saw that kind of, stood out was, Kokomo was better while Kokomo was better from the free throw line, Ben Davis shot more free throws, meaning that obviously the Wildcats were committing more fouls, and Kokomo also had 15 turnovers to Ben Davis's 6. So when you play a team like Ben Davis, every possession counts. I mean, they're undefeated for a reason. They capitalize off of all your mistakes incredibly well. You can't give them second chances. So when I look at my key to the game, if you're Kokomo, every possession has to count. You can't afford to have too many possessions where you throw the ball away, where you have a steal, where you can't have too many possessions where you end up fouling Ben Davis on a shot that they were going to miss. You have to maximize all the opportunities you have, and that's why I think the key to the game is if Kokomo, because I kind of put the onus on Kokomo when I was looking at this game because Ben Davis, I don't need to sit here and rattle off all the ways that Ben Davis is amazing. They're 32-0 for a reason. They're one of the best They're the best team in the state for a reason. There's not much more I can say on that. So I put the onus on Kokomo. They're the ones that have to execute and get it done. They've got to maximize every possession they have, and that's my key to the game for them.
Yeah, so my player to watch is from Ben Davis. I am actually looking at the guy that is going to be charged with defending and playing up against Flory Badunga. I'm looking at Zane Doty. He's 6'9", not the 6'10" that Badunga is. But he is Ben Davis's leading scorer. So this is going to be a battle down low. And it's going to be fun. Obvious, and he's averaging 13.6 points per game, 9.3 rebounds. His field goal percentage is nowhere close to what Badunga's is, but he is still a strong threat on the inside. So it's going to be a battle definitely down low. For me, the key to this game, Kokomo needs to find a few not just one more scorer, not a secondary scorer, but a third option as well. They need to be able to spread the ball around because that is one thing that Ben Davis does really well. Yeah, their leading scorer only averages 13.6, but they have several players. I mean, there's only one player on their entire roster that averages less than 1 point per game. One player. I mean, this team shares the ball extremely well. They're averaging 15.2 assists per game. They move the ball around. They have guys that can step up any given game. That's huge. So for Kokomo, if they really want to contend, Badunga's gonna get his. It's just it's a given. But is who else is going to be able to step up and get some more get some more scoring for Kokomo. That's the key. They need to be able to find a second and a third option to be able to keep Ben Davis honest. Because if not, look, Ben Davis is going to guard Kokomo exactly the way other in college basketball teams were guarding Purdue. All claps down on the center and, dare the other players to try to make a basket. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Because right now, like I said, Ben Davis, they distribute the ball, they share it. It's very well spread out. So the key to the game is definitely finding a second and third option come offense for Kokomo.
Yeah, it's gonna be. They're gonna have to have everybody contribute if they want to pull it off here. Looking at my prediction, I really want to go Kokomo here, especially because when I picked Penn, I had people on the TikTok channel. They were giving me grief. They're like, "Oh, how could you pick Penn over Ben Davis? What do you mean?" It's like I've heard Ryan Russillo say this a couple of times where he's like, "You know what? If you're not a fan of the team that, somebody picks, that team's never played anybody." And that's what everybody was in my comments section saying, "Oh, the reason why Penn's numbers are the way that they are is because they haven't played anybody." And I'm like, "You know what? Ben Davis almost has the same average. Does that mean what does that mean for them?" So, I kind of want to go against them for that, but they played and also like Kokomo did play Ben Davis well the first time around, and that's what makes it all the much more hard to not go with them. But the Wildcats, but that's just it though. Is that the Kokomo had a really good chance, played a really great game against Ben Davis back in December. I know they're two different teams now, but they still came up short after that insane performance by Badunga where he had 17 rebounds and a ton of blocks and that kind of thing. Yes, he didn't get his average as far as point total goes, but aside from that, one of his best nights of the year in terms of blocks, in terms of rebounding, was against Ben Davis. Ben Davis, as you mentioned, has the answer for Badunga in terms of Zane Dowdy, who was the leading scorer with 13 points. He had the 13 points in that meeting back in December, as well as 8 rebounds. On another note, when you look at common opponents, both these teams have played. Ben Davis is 6-0, Kokomo's 3-2. I don't like going chalk. I don't like going, with the team that, doesn't have the better story, the underdog, that kind of thing. I mean, going undefeated is a great story as well. Not underselling that. Kokomo is kind of the kind of this, I don't want to say Cinderella, they're the number 5 team, but they're kind of the underdog pick, and I want to go with them. But give me Ben Davis. I think they get the job done. They finish it off. They go 33-0. I mean, what a magical season they have, and I think they finish the job and get it done, get their perfect season.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I don't know. Kokomo is a fun story. Just because it's just a team you don't ever hear about.
Haven't won a title since 61. They're going on. This is 60 years that they haven't won a championship.
And it's not often for them to get a player of the caliber of Flory Badunga. But Ben Davis is just 32-0. This team has beaten every challenger. And they're just, I don't know.
Most of the time handedly, too. They average...
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game. but it's hard to pick Ben Davis, so I have to go Ben Davis. I would. It's one of those again. I would not be upset if Kokomo won because I would love to see that upset. And yes, that's an upset. Um, but yeah, give me Ben Davis. They complete the perfect season.
Well,
It's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to do in 4A to complete a perfect season.
Oh yeah,
especially at any level in Indiana high school basketball. So I mean, honestly, I'm thinking back, like at my time in high school, I don't believe, I think maybe my senior year, the Lawrence North basketball team went undefeated, but there were losses every other season I can remember. I mean, Arlington, for instance, North Central. I mean, there was, yeah. So
well,
it's tough.
And then that's just it. I mean, I mean, it's harder. I mean, I know there's, more games too, but like, it's really hard to go undefeated in basketball because you just have one bad night, you lose a game. And that's why a lot of times, I almost get in my head when I'm making these picks at the beginning of the tournament where, you have like a Wapahani team that like lost their first game of the year and hadn't lost since. Like, I was like, oh man, that just means they're due. And in basketball, that bell comes, that bell rings, more often than it does, because in football, obviously, it's more about like brute strength. This team's stronger than the other team, and it's easier to kind of go with that. But yeah, I mean, you never know when you're finally going to get that. I mean, we literally saw it last year. Chesterton was undefeated, goes in and plays Cathedral, gets their doors blown off. So, I mean, you just never know what you're going to see. So it is tough, but I think Ben Davis gets it done. It's a really impressive feat. So if they do get it done, congrats to them. Hats off to them because that's an amazing season. Thank you for tuning in to the Best of 3C Media 2023. As always, we're so incredibly grateful for all of your support from this past year and can't wait to see what 2024 brings. Happy New Year, everyone.